Hey guys, thanks for joining this tutorial. Today we're going to talk about modifiers in Solidity. But before writing some code in Remix, let's have a quick look at some of the key features of modifiers in Solidity. Well, what are actually modifiers? Modifiers are special functions that provide reusable code for other functions. They're typically used to check specific conditions before executing the function. The logic provided in a modifier can be used by many different functions. And in that way we can reduce the amount of code we have to write and make the contract more readable and easier to maintain. Also, you can apply several modifiers to a single function. They need to be separated by white space and they're executed in the order in which they are specified on the function. A modifier can also take arguments. And we always find the underscores in a modifier. That's where the code of the function that uses the modifier will be executed. And just like normal functions, modifiers can also be inherited and overridden. To allow a modifier to be overridden, we need to specify the virtual keyword in the base contract, and we need to use the override keyword in the derived contract. Okay, that's pretty much all about modifiers, so let's take a look at a concrete example in Remix. Here we have a very simple contract with two functions, change value and election. So the contract doesn't do anything useful. It's just for demonstration purpose and to play around with modifiers. So let's assume our two functions should only be executed by the owner of the contract. So what we could do, we could write some logic in all of our functions. We could write something like whatever, if message sender equals owner or whatever. But then we would have to duplicate a lot of code. We would have to write this code in every single function that is restricted only to the owner of the contract. So that's why we use a modifier. But first, let's add a constructor to our contract. And in the constructor, we just set the owner of the contract, which is an address. Let's make it public. And we call it owner. And so now in the constructor, we can say the owner is the message sender. So that's the address that deploys the contract. So it's basically the deploy of the contract. And now we would like to do something like, okay, we want this function to be executed only by the owner. So ideally, we have something like this. And that's it. No code to write in the function, that's all. And that's our modifier. So now we have to write a modifier. We write a modifier by specifying the modifier keyword. We name it only owner. We don't need any arguments. We just need to provide the logic that verifies if this function will be called by the owner of the contract. So what you do? We just use, for example, require. We could also use an if and reword with a specific error. But let's keep things simple and just use a require. And what we want that the message sender, whoever is calling the function, is equal to the owner, which we set in the constructor. If that's not the case, we just provide a message, something like, you're not authorized. And once we pass this test, we would like to execute the code in the function. We do this by using the underscore. And that's it. So now what happens is whoever calls this function change value goes through this test, which is specified in the only owner modifier. And if the test passes, we land here and the code is executed. Okay, So we can also add this modifier to our end election function, and we'll create a second modifier specific for the end election, which of course can also be added to other functions. Ideally, what we would like to do, okay, let's assume that's a contract that manages some voting contract, and the owner of the contract can end the election after a specific time. So we would add something like only after, and here we specify an argument, something like whatever, for example, election end time. So whoever calls this function will need to pass the logic that we'll specify in this modifier. Okay, so we take the modifier, we add a second one, call it only after, and here we just specify some time, which is an unsigned integer, and well, let's just call it time, because this modifier could also be used by other functions. It's not specifically for election end time, so we could pass any kind of time to this modifier. And now what do we have to do? We have to make sure that this function can only be called after a specific amount of time has passed. So again, we use a require, and to get the current time, we can use the global Solidity variable block timestamp. This gives us the time in seconds after Unix epoch. So this is basically the moment right now when we call the function. And we say this must be bigger than a specific amount of time we're using. Otherwise, we tell the user, no, that's too early. You're not allowed to call this function yet. Once again, we'll add the underscore. Here, the function body will be inserted. And of course, we didn't specify election end time. And that's a state variable, unsigned integer. And again, we can set it in the constructor. For example, we can provide a specific amount of time for the voting period. Let's call it voting time. And we just assign the election end time to the voting time. Okay, that's pretty much it. Now, first thing, here we use two modifiers, and we're allowed to do so. The first modifier that will be executed will be the only owner, which makes sure that only the owner of the contract can call and execute the function. And once we pass the test specified here, we call the second modifier the only after, and we pass in the election end time. The election end time was calculated here. Sorry, there's a mistake here. It's not just voting time, of course. We need to add the block timestamp. Block timestamp. Yeah, that's it. So the election end time is basically now, which is provided by block timestamp, plus a certain amount of time. This could be a day, could be a week, could be 2 weeks, which is specified in the constructor. So the election end time is basically now plus whatever we specify. And the test get executed whenever we call this function. This could be, let's say, in 2 weeks' time. The block timestamp would be a time corresponding to 2 weeks' time. Must be bigger than the time provided, than the election end time. If this passes, we are fine and we can execute and modify the state variable. Okay, let's quickly deploy the contract and do some tests. Okay, we have to specify the voting time. Usually this could be a week, whatever, in seconds specified. We make it just 1 minute, so we can quickly test it. Okay, we deploy it and we say, okay, within the first 60 seconds, we are not allowed to call the function. We should get an error. Let's make this a bit bigger here. Okay, let's clean this out. We deploy the contract, 60 seconds. Okay, that's fine. Now we call it immediately, and this should fail. We call the end election. Okay, this fails, and we even get the message, you're too early. That's exactly what we want, because the 60 seconds we specified didn't pass yet. Also, when we check, well, the initial value will be 0, let's change the value, make it 1. That's fine, passes, check the value. Okay, that's fine. But of course, that works because we are the owner. We are using the address we used to deploy the contract. Now let's change the address. Now we are no longer the owner. And when we call the only owner, we won't pass the test here because the message sender is now this address here and it doesn't correspond to the owner we set in the constructor. Okay, let's give it a try. Let's clear this out. Call change value, make it 2. And of course it fails. I check here, well, it's still v1. Okay, that's fine. But now the 60 seconds should have passed and we can call end election. Let's try it again. Well, okay, 60 seconds passed, but we are not acting as the owner of the contract. So when we call, it will fail. It will fail again. Let's give it a try. Okay, exactly what we want. Now we change back to the owner of the contract. We take the first contract, the first address, and now it should work. Let's come here, clean it out. Now we can call end election because we are acting as the owner and 60 seconds should have passed. And the election, great, now it works. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you very much for watching and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.